I would like us to back up a bit and take advantage of your experience as well as background in the foreign policy arena. Just in terms of evaluation, because we keep hearing, all right, foreign policy is dynamic, foreign policy is a projection of your domestic interest. But we do know, as scholars have said, that this dynamism and this projection of your domestic interest is often grounded in theoretical principles, sometimes referred to as doctrines. How much does doctrine govern our foreign policy formulation that the actors, such as the two former permanent secretaries we have here, then go out to implement? So when you are conceiving your foreign policy, I mean, the realism school, for instance, will tell you that nations fear each other. And so, therefore, your foreign policy must be on the basis of deterrence, on the basis of what you need to do so that you don't get overwhelmed by others. What governs our foreign policy articulation and projection?
Thank you for the analytical answers you have already given to the question you asked me. Let me begin by agreeing to disagree with the two diplomats. I do agree with Ambassador Lolo that there is need for a foreign policy review, believing that we should have had a foreign policy review since the last one, 1986. You see, when we are talking about review, I think there are three types. And he focused essentially, like Ambassador Keshi rightly did, on what he called comprehensive foreign policy review. There has always been regular foreign policy review. Ambassador Lolo, Ambassador Keshi, they know more than I do in this case. They know quite well that our plenipotentiaries, our ambassadors are regularly having, from time to time, foreign policy reviews. They call it regional reviews. So our ambassadors meet regularly to look at this foreign policy implementation, the challenges, and they are addressing. But when we now look at, for instance, the scope, we can now say that one may not be comprehensive in terms of the stakeholders involved, not necessarily in terms of the issues discussed. I do agree with him that foreign policy is an extension of the domestic policy. And Ambassador Keshi is again very right by saying, look, if the domestic environment, if is weak, then how will you expect a dynamic foreign policy externally? You see, my own definition of foreign policy, as much as I also agree that, look, there's a nexus between the domestic and the external, foreign policy is essentially the pursuit of certain interests in international relations, basically aimed at defending, protecting, and advancing national development strategy back home. Now, from that explanation, we will now see that there's a distinction between foreign policy as a focus and foreign policy as a technique. When, for instance, Ambassador Lolo said that we need not have a review of objectives, he's now talking about foreign policy as a focus, and he's right. And Ambassador Keshi again is right by saying that, okay, look, if your home environment, economy is weak, you cannot expect any vibrancy. But I think that in this case, where I disagree is that I bring Professor Bolagi Akinyemi into the question. He has argued that rather than use the domestic environment to attain your foreign policy objectives. You can also use the international environment to advance, to raise, to push forward the domestic interests. So it has to be both domestic, international, relating here and there. That's why he came up with the idea of a concert of medium powers, according to which you can be weak at home. But look, let me tell you, I know these Lolos, I know these species. They have sagacious minds. Now it is intelligence. It is the extent of the sagacity, your attitudinal disposition that drives foreign policy. Because you are asking me now to look at the basic, the fundamentals of foreign policy. It is a priori the extent to which you have skills, tacts to deal with the other interlocutor. Let me tell you, for instance, in Nigeria, nobody teaches physiognomy. They study international relations, but unlike in advanced countries where they teach physiognomy, you look at your interlocutor, you look at the other negotiator, you look at the movement of his eyes, the cornea, and try to predict his intentions. They don't teach that one here. So what drives foreign policy begins with the extent of knowledge, experience, all right, in diplomatic negotiations. This is very lacking. There are other fundamental principles too. For instance, we raised the issue of Ambassador Lulu told us that there is no moral appetite. It cannot be more correct. That's to tell you that Nigeria used to have a foreign policy focus, but we don't have anything now. All that we are doing basically is to react. And this is why, when we talk about review, it can be partial, it can be holistic in practice. And I think that two basic fundamental principles that we should focus attention on in this discussion is to look at the doctrines, the policies, the principles. For instance, is a non-alignment principle still valid? Do we need that? Do we need reciprocity? You talk about a good neighborliness in the report we were giving. Is good neighborliness good? If it is good, to what extent? Why will, for instance, Nigeria be sustaining the Gambia, many countries like that, and then they will go to the UN and still vote against us, in spite of the fact that the ECOWAS has already adopted the Nigerian candidate as ECOWAS candidate? ECOWAS will present the same ECOWAS candidate to the African Union. African Union will now change the nature of the candidature and say this is African candidate. Now, African candidate will now go to the UN. Then a country in West Africa will now come to vote against us or having reservation, and so on and so forth. Why shouldn't the principle of reciprocity apply in this case? So you see, there are many principles that we need to factor in if we say we want to review foreign policy, so that Nigeria cannot just a big giant for nothing.
It is said that the behavior or direction of a nation is determined by the character of persons who are holding authority or positions of authority in that country. So whatever direction that Nigeria is going is determined by us domestically. And I want to align myself with what Lolo said. Comprehensive review of foreign policy will determine a better direction for Nigeria. And I want to bring in Professor AKINTERINWA here. Now, you have told us that there has always been review of foreign policy. You may have to clarify that, because from what we've heard from the two ambassadors, there has not been any comprehensive review of the nation's foreign policy with respect to ensuring that the three arms of government are involved, the civil society involved, the intelligentsia, the Nigerian public, as key holders were involved. So, are you advocating that there should be no comprehensive review of our foreign policy, that we should fall back on what it used to be?
For your question, again. I thank you because the two of you are always asking very sagacious questions. You see, when we talk about review, we easily forget that the concept of review is different from the concept of amendment. Amendment is different from modifying. When you are modifying a text, when you are reviewing, conceptually, legally, they mean different things. Now, when we are talking about the comprehensiveness of foreign policy, Ambassador Lolo talked about some of the constituents. He talked about character. He talks about content. He talks about capacity, and so on and so forth. We will not say he's not correct. The only thing is that he cannot be more correct. But when you are correct, you are still ignoring many other salient factors. And I ask this question: how do you determine comprehensiveness? I am, first of all, positing here that no country of the world, including the United States, can have any factor of comprehensiveness in his foreign policy making. Why? Because the issues involved are indeterminable. You can only deal with the issues you know. Issues are evolving on a daily basis. So when you say you are reviewing, what are you reviewing? You can only review in terms of foreign policy technique, foreign policy strategy, how to respond to the changing challenges. Now, the issues, which we can call content in this case, they have unlimited scope. In terms of participants, who are those people that will be involved? Ambassador Keshi rightly pointed out that he had the opportunity to participate in the review processes, that it is essentially more of a dialogue between the foreign ministry and a host of others. Civil societies are not there. Academics are not there. You see, we do not always have a conceptual, clarification of what we are pursuing and the strategy. Please, I am not saying that we should not have a comprehensive foreign policy review. What I am trying to say is that Ambassador Lolo posited that since 1986, there has not been a foreign policy review, and we can put the we also put the comprehensive as an adjective to qualify it, comprehensive foreign policy review. When I referred to the regional foreign policy review by ambassadors, I was to add that academics are regularly also reviewing foreign policy. But when we talk about comprehensiveness in this case, is it when all the stakeholders, all put together, come to sit down and discuss that makes the review comprehensive? Is it when all the issues in foreign policy, all right, are put together and being discussed that we talk about comprehensiveness? Is it when we have 2, 3 days, 4, 5 days comprehensive foreign policy, sitting down discussing that it becomes comprehensive? No. You see, the word comprehensive itself is at best very relative. The beauty of it all, if you look at the changes in the world as of today, let's look at international relations as of today. We are likely to be challenged by 2, 3 main factors. The United States has told the world now that all countries that are against LGBT will not have any aid, no assistance, especially in the security area. They will not give any assistance. Now look at that one. How are we preparing for that? That's one critical issue. Now look at the factor of immigration, the new policy. Immigration is a global issue. Now, the conditionalities being attached to the grant of visa for immigration and so on and so forth. They are very conflicting, and they are not in the interest of Nigeria. Now, if Ambassador Kechi disagrees with me, I like that one, because that is the beauty in psychology of human differences. Everybody is considering different factors, and that's why we have different versions of the truth at any given time. You see, the beauty of his argument also remains that, look, if you have a strong domestic base, you'll be able to perform better. I agree, but I am saying that you can also make use of the international environment to improve on your domestic base. How? For instance, look at the United States. We have some Nigerians now in the administration of Joe Biden. Okay? Now, the American environment, very strong institutions. If we sit down, we use the sagacious minds of our diplomats. I normally differentiate between an ordinary diplomat and a diplomatist. For me, a diplomatist is someone who has the representational character as defined by the 1961 Vienna Convention, representing, protecting national interests. When you combine that representational factor with the capacity for intellectual development, intellectualizing, bringing new ideas, strategizing in the Kissengerian manner, please, then you are a diplomatist. And that's the beauty of it. We don't have diplomatists, many of them, in the system. We are at best reactive. So when we are discussing this type of issue, the beauty of NTA presenters, for instance, when we are discussing this type of foreign policy issue, is that they ask questions that take you beyond the known already. So talking about what we already know will not take us anywhere, but now trying to look at emergencies, situational scenarios in the future. That is how we can talk about comprehensive review. And comprehensive review now is that, look, the human knowledge is also limited. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. 2 days ago, nobody knew that Idris Deby will be killed. They've just announced the result of an election. And in this case, the next thing, characteristic of him, he went to visit the soldiers to give them moral support. But he didn't know that he was going to meet his Waterloo there. So how do you prepare? How do you talk about comprehensive review of what you do not know? So you can never have anything like comprehensive review. You can always review to the maximum of the extent of your interest that you know. That is the point I'm making. I am not saying that we should not have comprehensive review or that there is no need. There is need to have a comprehensive review, but putting comprehensive to the extent of the known, not the unknown.
One aspect I wanted to raise, I want to skip it, but I also want to raise it. In the practice field of our diplomacy, this has caused some financial consequences for us. Nigeria appears to be a signatory to any and every treaty and protocol, sometimes with very little understanding of the key issues and the implications that has for us. One exception that we have seen recently is the African Continental Free Trade Area, that President Buhari said, no, hold on, we're going to have a review and a deeper understanding before we proceed. What do we need to do in this regard so that officials don't just get up and then sign? And when you sign, you are bound.
Well, thank you again. There's the level of signing. There is the level of ratification. In the context of Nigeria, there's always the level of domestication. In fact, the beginning is at the level of what they call paraffin, when the permanent representatives will normally negotiate and initial before coming to signing proper. The African Free, Continental Trade Agreement, the government of Nigeria did well by that time by saying, wait, we want to study, we want to review. This particular time, the concept of review is very appropriate. The issue was that at the domestic level, we were yet to identify, to delineate what interests would be at stake. We were actually not producing enough. So you want a free trade area, you want to open your borders, but at the end of the day, it can only be for inflow of foreign goods. You do not have goods, products in exchange.